Hello, Mr. Gheorghiu. How are you?
Thank you. You?
We see we have today the first game from we speak about it in 2024.
Yes,
I'm also good. So looking forward to for many more beautiful games this year
hopefully,
also.
yeah, hopefully. We'll see.
Okay, so we are here in Baden Baden 1981
Yes.
against Honfi Karoly.
Yeah, Baden Baden was in that period one of the most important tournaments in Europe and in the world also. And it was organized probably for the last time in that form, because it was really a super tournament. You know, many very strong grandmasters played there. And just as a very interesting aspect, the first prize was a Mercedes limousine. It was a little bit unusual for a chess tournament, but it happened finally.
Interesting. Yeah, you told me a little bit. So it was you could win a limousine, and
if I could win the first prize. Unfortunately, I played, a little bit less successfully than in Moscow in 81. And I had some very good games and some, some small mistakes that didn't allow me finally to get the limousine, let's say, jokingly.
And who got the limousine?
Grandmaster Ribli from Hungary.
From Hungary.
They won together, Miles and Ribli. And finally, Ribli got the limousine because Miles had already won at home, so he preferred to get the normal price.
Oh, interesting. And the other player was from which country?
From England.
From England.
Great
Okay.
Britain, yes.
And was Ribli able to take the car? I mean, 1981 was the communist.
Yes, because they had a very good tradition in Hungary. They had a very strong team, the Olympic team. Very strong grandmasters, Portish, Ribli, Adorian, and Sachs. They had their golden team in that period. And as long as I know, Kadar was, the first secretary in Hungary in that time. He loves chess very much, and therefore probably he was okay. I mean, he could take the limousine.
He could drive in the communist Hungary, Mercedes limousine.
Right.
Okay, so let's see the game.
Coming back to our game, Grandmaster Honfi was well known for his opening repertoire. I mean, with black, he preferred usually to play against d4, the greenfield defense. So in that order that we had in our game, d4, knight f6, c4, g6. Now the third move is knight c3 normally, after knight c3, d5, we have the greenfield, So d5 is a little bit unusual, but doesn't allow any more greenfield defense, d5. Okay, so after d5, c6, he reacted very well. I mean, it's the normal line to play like this to open a little bit the game. Like in greenfield, of course, but different. So knight c3, he took in d5, I took in d5, bishop d6, e4, bishop g7. And now we have another line, of course, after knight f3. He couldn't play the greenfield, but myself with white, I couldn't play anymore my Zemish,
Zemish, yes.
So now you have to play knight f3. It's the best move, knight f3, to develop the pieces. So after knight f3 castle, bishop e2, and now b5. This is a little bit surprising, but it's a very good move. Black tries to get immediately a very tactical game. Now, if you take, for instance, in b5, is bad. You can take only with the bishop, because with the knight, you lose the pawn from e4, and it's not good at all. Yes. So if you take with the bishop in b5, now it comes the surprise, After bishop b5, knight takes e4. It's very unpleasant, because now if you take in e4, after queen a5 check, black is already better. He captures the piece, and your king is still in the center, takes, and now queen takes b5, and okay. Now you don't have castle anymore. If he has time to play bishop a6, you are almost already lost probably, with white. But even if you don't allow this, black is better anytime, it's no problem. You have to fight, to get maybe an even game, which is not good at all for white in the opening. No? So, of course, you don't take in b5, and you play modestly a3, but this is also very good. He realized the move b5, which is very active, but white has control on d4, a piece comes to d4, and he has a small weakness, later on we'll see this, on c6. That proves to be very important for the last moments of the game, So after a3, he plays a6. Now he controls the pawns, b5 and a6. Yeah, it looks that black is all right, but in reality, white is always a little bit better. Small advantage, but always he has some advantage. Okay, so bishop e3, knight d7, knight d4. This is very important to control immediately, if you can, the square c6. Now he plays normal bishop b7, no? Now f3. Now we see the result of the opening. White has a small edge. It's not too much, but it's clear. Why? Because every piece of white is better posted. The knight in d4, bishop e3, bishop e2, control on the queen side, and maybe later on we can arrive with a piece on c6. If you control the square c6, you have some clear chances to try to play for win. Okay, so rook c8, normal. Castle, and now again a good move, knight e5. He played all the best moves because now he threatens immediately to put a knight in c4, and he can take the two bishops. I mean, if you are forced to give the white bishop in c4, it seems that white has very little, if nothing, So, okay, white accepts the idea. He plays queen d2, inviting his opponent to put the knight in c4. Okay, knight c4. Now you take in c4, of course. He takes with the rook. And it seems that black has already a very good game. No problem. But okay, after b3, rook c8, a4. I mean, it weakens a little bit the structure on the queen side. Now he's forced to play b4, because if he takes in a4, it's even worse. b4, knight e2, and okay, a5. Normal. Everything is normal. And now, as I told you before, rook c1. Now we try to arrive with a piece in c6. Anyway, we control the square c6. So now he plays queen d7. Probably the best move to wait a little bit, to see what happens. And now again, very clear, knight b5. Now bishop a6. And the other knight to d4. Now we see the result. Everything is controlled, and if we can, and we can finally, we arrive with a piece in c6, and that gives a better game for white in any position.
But wasn't better for black to keep the bishop on b7?
No, because the bishop in b7 is very passive, has no control.
But was not defending this.
But the idea, from white was, again, very simple. If he doesn't play immediately bishop a6, it was already threatening bishop b6, winning a pawn in a5. You see, that was another idea for white. It will happen in the game later on. So if the bishop stays on b7, after bishop b6, he loses a pawn. And if he loses a pawn, then the game is lost.
So now he can defend somehow with the rook, or
no? He tries to to avoid all this, and finally to provoke later on the move a6. I mean e6. If he can play e6, it seems that he can have some counterplay for white, for black. Pardon.
Yeah.
So now, exactly here, he played e6, and from this moment you have to play the best moves in every position. Is move by move. White is better, but you have to demonstrate why and how. You see? So, knight c6, the only move. After knight c6, he has to take, of course. Now you take back. And rook e8. Well, He has to play something. I mean, it's the only counterplay for black, rook e8. Control on the e file, but now comes the surprise, bishop b6, very logical. I mean, after bishop b6, he can't avoid to lose a pawn. If he loses one pawn, he has very good chances to lose the game, So now he has to decide what to do. He accepted the challenge and he tries to play very actively on the other side, with knight h5. He threatens something tactically later on, The idea here, instead of knight h5, was to wait, for instance, or to play also very tactical game by taking in b5. Taking b5, and queen b7. But after bishop takes a5, white is better anyway, so he has to accept the fact, If he plays like this, knight h5, he gives the pawn on a5 and tries to have something on the other side against the white king. Okay, so we took the pawn, and he took back in b5, we took, and now he played bishop c3. That was the idea, his hope, Now, if you move the queen, for instance, the logical move would be, for instance, queen f2. But after queen f2, it's a very unpleasant surprise, knight f4, and it's very unclear who is better. Now, after knight f4, queen f2, knight f4, because he's threatening already knight d3, rook e2, or knight e2 check. And it's most unpleasant for white, So, of course, that was black's idea. But now, after rook takes c3, white gives the exchange, but has a very strong initiative, probably decisive initiative later on, So everything is forced. He has to take in c3, bishop takes c3. Now we see the result. He has to move back the rook, because in some positions, white has a very nasty threat, queen d4, and if you don't pay attention, you can be mated later on, on this big diagonal. So now queen d4. So after queen d4, of course, f6. Well, black has to defend, has no counterplay at all. He has his exchange up, but very unpleasant position, completely, tied up like this, has to wait to see what happens later on in next moves. So now, b6. After b6, everything is very clear, In some positions, you threaten to go on with the pawn, to b7. So after knight g7, queen b4, we're threatening already b7, decisive, So, again, everything will be forced. Now, knight f5, rook e1, and here he hopes to have some tactical chances, in the same time on the e file, and maybe later on to give back the exchange and hope to have a draw somehow, but his position is lost already, You have to play well until the end. So after b7, he has to play rook b8, because otherwise he loses a piece, He threatened to take in e8 and then b8 queen, and it's finished. So
that was this danger from here.
Yeah. And if he took in e1, was the same thing. I mean, he took in e1, you take back with the bishop, and the threat is the same, b8 queen, and it's finished. So rook b8 is the only move, but the position is hopeless already. Now you take, he has to take, and now bishop takes f6. Now the game goes on, and we have tactical threats already on the big diagonal, And the other threat is to play later on g4, and the knight has no moves, you see. So he has to take, of course, and now queen c4, queen e4. Now you have control on the e file. He could resign here, of course, but he was in very big time trouble. So now he played bishop g5 after king f7, and rook b7 and g4. And now it's clear. Now he has to move the knight, and the position is completely winning for white, I mean, he has to play there, and after queen f4 check,
he resigned.
He resigned, because now the threat is clear. He has to move to g8, and after rook g8, king g8, rook e7 wins immediately. Rook e7. Now he's forced to give the queen, because if he doesn't give the queen f7 mates, in one move, later on.
Yes.
Well, the game was most interesting, but very unusual, because it was not Greenfield anymore. It was some other kind of opening, where white pushed already, move by move, and finally it was possible to win a very interesting game.
There was a lot of pressure.
Yes.
And,
you can see immediately. It was strategy and tactics together, like this, in every move.
Yes.
On the very high level, for us, it's very clear, why and how. It was one of the best games of the tournament, this one, yes.
Nice, beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Gheorghiu.
You are.